Oh, oh, Michael, where art thou?
This sounds very old. Appalachian Job. That's awesome.
I'm an apostle of common sense, 300 pounds, can hardly walk. My fingertips are white and dusty, climbing on a piece of chalk. He's climbing on a piece of chalk.
So dumb.
That's awesome.
Let's get one more verse.
You know what I'm going to do with this one? My daughter plays the banjo. I'm going to give it to her.
I died just before the Second World War, but I saw the whole thing coming. What didn't y'all listen to me for? What didn't y'all listen to Chesterton for?
You're listening to another episode of Chesterton's Gateway with Ethan, Nicolle, and Michael Grumbine, and me, AI Chesterton. Now grab a partner and do-si-do.
Do-si-do. I did spell it out for him.
It's fare thee well,
awesome.
I have just finished my autobiography. I still have them, never written 5 volumes on the neglect of cheese. 5 whole volumes on neglect of cheese.
I love all the inside jokes you throw in there.
It's non-stop inside jokes. Well, this is... I basically took Man of Constant Sorrow and changed the lyrics.
Oh, I was going to say, I wonder what...
You can hear that structure on there, right?
Yeah.
I
love that song. And so there was something... I was recognizing something, but I don't... Yeah,
because I haven't figured out. There's probably a way, but I can't get AI to copy the song directly, and that would probably strike us on YouTube anyway. But
so anyone,
it's about the day your death. So his last book that he wrote before he died was his autobiography.
Yep,
he never did write his 5 volumes.
His 5 volumes on cheese, on the neglect of cheese. Yeah. You read about that. I love the fact that
we actually didn't.
I love he actually didn't what?
I said we actually didn't, because that episode never came out. It's going to be at the end of this season.
Sorry, I am speaking to the future, from the future.
To the future, yes, as Chesterton did.
Exactly. What I love about that whole thing that you just did there was last episode we talked about the democracy of the dead. We brought up that part and this is like a version of the democracy, like Chesterton from the grave is telling us about all the things he did at the end of his life and how we should have paid attention to him. So I love it. Love it.
All right, well, we are in part 2. If you haven't been following along, this is part 2 of the book of Job. You should go back and listen to part 1. So this all makes sense.
Introduction to the book of Job, written in 1929.
And we like to go through Chesterton paragraph by paragraph, or even half paragraph by half paragraph. And we are 1/3 in. I don't know if there's any kind of recap we want to throw in here. He basically set up book of Job as, the disputes about whether or not it was written by one guy or not. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, the main character of the book of all the Old Testament is God, and that what the book of Job does is something interesting, which is it juxtapositions it. It's finally man questioning God. Like when you have the other patriarchs in the Old Testament, they might grumble, they might try to avoid God and run away, so and end up in the belly of a whale, But there's no one that challenges God directly the way Job does. And the basis of that challenge is that Job is described as a just man and in one sense not deserving of any of the bad things that occur in his life as a result of this wager between God and Satan. So it's an interesting book, and Job and Chesterton's going to go into now saying that it's the most interesting of all these ancient books and why he thinks so.
I'll just quickly replay his lead into this paragraph so you know what he's setting up here.
Sure.
The book of Job stands definitely alone because the book of Job definitely asks, but what is the purpose of God? Is it worth the sacrifice even of our miserable humanity? Of course, it is easy enough to wipe out our own paltry wills for the sake of a will that is grander and kinder. But is it grander and kinder? Let God use his tools. Let God break his tools. But what is he doing, and what are they being broken for? It is because of this question that we have to attack as a philosophical riddle the riddle of the book of Job.
And he keeps talking about that, the philosophical riddle of Job.
Right. So let's get into it.
Right. Let's get in.
The present importance of the book of Job cannot be expressed adequately even by saying that it is the most interesting of ancient books. We may almost say of the book of Job that it is the most interesting of modern books. In truth, of course, neither of the two phrases covers the matter, because fundamental human religion and fundamental human irreligion are both at once old and new. Philosophy is either eternal or it is not philosophy. The modern habit of saying, "This is my opinion, but I may be wrong," is entirely irrational. If I say that it may be wrong, I say that is not my opinion. The modern habit of saying, "Every man has a different philosophy. This is my philosophy, and it suits me." The habit of saying this is mere weak-mindedness. A cosmic philosophy is not constructed to fit a man. A cosmic philosophy is constructed to fit a cosmos. A man can no more possess a private religion than he can possess a private sun and moon.
This really flies in the face of modern philosophy.
Right. Well, modern philosophy is the result of the moderns in philosophy, the people like Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Hegel, Kant, and Nietzsche, who are all, they turn philosophy in the last 200 years from something which Chesterton is appealing to, which is an eternal search, a search for eternal truth, the truth about the cosmos, to the subjective truth. It's my truth. I believe this, and I can't really know if there's an objective eternal truth out there. These moderns wrecked philosophy, and Chesterton is having none of it. And he's pointing us back to the ancient idea, which we all know if we take philosophy seriously, which is, if it's worth it, it's only worth it because it is eternal. And or in his words, philosophy is either eternal or it's not philosophy. The word philosophy, it comes from philosophia, the Greek word. It's the lover of wisdom. Sophia is wisdom. And so if you are a philosopher, you love wisdom. And what is wisdom but eternal truth? And so there is indeed a weak-mindedness in modern philosophy, which relegates your particular view of the universe as a subjective thing. Chesterton's saying, nah, you don't really mean that. And if you do, it's just you being weak-minded. You can't. If you believe a philosophy or a religion is true, you believe it's true, period. Whether you can say, I'm not going to force my religion on other people. That's different. But you still believe that it's true, whether it's a philosophy or a religion or something else.
Right. All right. I should have had that ready to go. Here it comes. Next paragraph.
The first of the intellectual beauties of the book of Job is that it is all concerned with this desire to know the actuality, the desire to know what is, and not merely what seems. If moderns were writing the book, we should probably find that Job and his comforters got on quite well together by the simple operation of referring their differences to what is called the temperament, saying that the comforters were by nature optimists, and Job by nature a pessimist. And they would be quite comfortable, as people can often be for some time at least, by agreeing to say what is obviously untrue. For if the word pessimist means anything at all, then emphatically Job is not a pessimist. His case alone is sufficient to refute the modern absurdity of referring everything to physical temperament. Job does not in any sense look at life in a gloomy way. If wishing to be happy and being quite ready to be happy constitutes an optimist, Job is an optimist. He is a perplexed optimist. He is an exasperated optimist. He is an outraged and insulted optimist.
You added a break there because it's a long paragraph.
Okay. All right. So he's attacking the idea that people hide behind the hard discussions about what is true and what is not true by relegating it to temperament, like saying, oh, of course you think that the X, Y, and Z is the case because you're an optimist, or you're a pessimist, because you're a realist, because you're a materialist, because you're like, there's a lot of words we use nowadays. Of course you think that this is that way because you're inclined to be spiritual. You're a spiritual person, so you think spiritual realities are real. And it is a way of avoiding the real discussion of, is a thing true or not true? Just like you can talk about whether Australia really is a real place or is not a real place, you can also talk about whether a thing in the spiritual realm is true or not true. You might eventually end up saying one can't know that whether something is true or not, a particular given. So we don't know whether there's life on other planets, intelligent life on other planets. We just don't have sufficient information. But nevertheless, there either is intelligent life on other planets or there is not. There is an objective reality there. And so here back in this, he's saying Job wants there to be good things. He's not a gloomy man. He's just confronted with the reality of all these terrible things actually happening to him. So he's very exasperated. He's very outraged. He's very insulted. He wants there to be an order in the universe. And he says, justify. Well, and anyway, sorry, I went on to the next part of the next paragraph in our reading, which is
the next half or the next paragraph. Okay, well, let's continue this paragraph.
He wishes the universe to justify itself, not because he wishes it be caught out, but because he really wishes it be justified. He demands an explanation from God, but he does not do it at all in the spirit in which John Hampden might demand an explanation from Charles I. He does it in the spirit in which a wife might demand an explanation from her husband, whom she really respected. He remonstrates with his Maker because he is proud of his Maker. He even speaks of the Almighty as his enemy, but he never doubts at the back of his mind that his enemy has some kind of a case which he does not understand. In a fine and famous blasphemy, he says, "Oh, that mine adversary had written a book." Verse 31-35. It never really occurs to him that it could possibly be a bad book. He is anxious to be convinced, that is, he thinks that God could convince him. In short, we may say again that if the word optimist means anything, which I doubt, Job is an optimist. He shakes the pillars of the world and strikes insanely at the heavens. He lashes the stars, but it is not to silence them. It is to make them speak.
I love that.
So when he says, "Oh, that mine adversary had written a book," is he saying, "I wish God had written a book so I could just understand everything"?
Yes, but he also that's an oblique reference to the adversary. So Satan is the adversary. That's one translation of the word Satan, and so he doesn't know it maybe, but if his adversary had written a book, it would have been a bad book because Satan doesn't write good books. So I think that's what Chesterton's saying there. I could be wrong. Maybe it's talking about God writing a bad book, but I don't think so. So, and then Hampden, you have a nice note on Hampden, but basically he was one of the sparks for the First English Civil War, which resulted in the death of Charles I, the Catholic monarch, and the institution of a republic in England under Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell. And so, but Hampden was a man persecuted and who the king tried to arrest. And so he's speaking, Chesterton is saying he might speak to the king and demand an explanation for his arrest and why he's being persecuted by the king. In an interesting twist, Chesterton is putting a Protestant in place against a Catholic king in place as Job against God. Anyway.
And he's definitely a Catholic by the time you wrote this.
Yes, he is. Been Catholic 15 years at this point.
All right, next paragraph.
In the same way, we may speak of the official optimists, the comforters of Job. Again, if the word pessimist means anything, which I doubt, the comforters of Job may be called pessimists rather than optimists. All that they really believe is not that God is good, but that God is so strong that it is much more judicious to call him good. It would be the exaggeration of censure to call them evolutionists, but they have something of the vital error of the evolutionary optimist. They will keep on saying that everything in the universe fits into everything else, as if there were anything comforting about a number of nasty things all fitting into each other. We shall see later how God, in the great climax of the poem, turns this particular argument altogether upside down.
So I'd love to kind of expand on that. Like, how does he make that comparison to Job's friends being like evolutionists?
Right. So the evolutionist removes all idea of there being able to be a good thing or a bad thing. There's just what happens. There's adaptation, there's necessity, there's things that work together, not because there's any goodness or any intent or any will, but because that's just the way they work together. It's just a bunch of chemical reactions followed by the more complex chemical reactions, aka animals, trying to survive in the environment of other chemical reactions. And so we only call it an evolutionary thing good by accident. It's not really good. It just happens to be the way things fit together. And Chesterton hates this. He hates that idea. He would propound the idea that there are real goods really intended by people like God and sometimes men, and that there are real evils as well by contrast. And that's why he keeps going on about his irritation about whether they're optimists and pessimists. I mean, he'll use them. Obviously, he does think there's such a thing because he uses them as the argument. But he keeps saying, which I doubt, because he wants to undermine people that ascribe all intentionality. It's kind of, it's like simplistic 6-year-old. It's like what Freud did. Freud tried to reduce everything to the Oedipal complex and say that, all interactions with our parents or man to a woman are because guys want to have sex with their moms. That's the real reason why we do everything. And so it's stupidly simplistic. And Chesterton thinks the same thing about optimism and pessimism. They're stupidly simplistic, and people they avoid good questions by just using these terms.
Yeah, I've always said it just because optimism and pessimism are kind of just an accepted way of viewing things. Struggled to understand his real beef with it, and I think I'm starting to get it.
Yeah, I think he finds a beef in that they're used as a smokescreen for things that ought to be really discussed. You ought to really get down to whether there's truth or falsehood, whether there's objective reality, what the philosophical questions and answers actually are, not just hide behind, oh, you just think that because you have a certain temperament, a way of looking at the world, and that torques him off. So.
And that way of thinking has become really prominent. Like, I always wonder about that with, I will call myself an introvert. People call themselves extroverts.
Yep.
It makes me wonder if that's a real, it kind of also defines you in a way that it kind of traps you, or it can be used as an excuse. And then this has gotten even further with people with their different either gender identity stuff or mental health stuff, or like there's all these labels people. I've noticed my kids who are, especially in this kind of recent culture, teenagers, or even I have a sister who came up with this definition of her. She's a demi-romantic asexual, which turns out that means she's only attracted to somebody when she has an emotional connection with them, which to me means she's a female.
Well, not just female. Is it? How is that not just human? I'm attracted.
I mean, I think a man can have a sexual attraction without an emotional. Okay,
yeah, I guess your initial flash, but men don't pursue someone for any length of time without having an emotional attachment to them. For us, the physical provides an emotional attachment, or can be easily provided. But nevertheless, how is that not just? I agree with you. It's just describing all women, maybe, but. That's hilarious.
So people put a lot of the labels on themselves that kind of ward off.
Do you think they're doing it to constrain themselves or to excuse behavior, or they just like I mean, there's a part of that labeling where we come up with those labels because we want to try to describe what exists.
We want to understand. I think
Yeah.
there's some truth to that.
Yeah, but then they end up being used, like you said, as kind of crutches a lot of times for people, as an excuse for bad behavior sometimes. I know I have done that before in the past. I've called myself an introvert as
Yeah.
an excuse for why I don't go to a social event that I should probably go to, but I really don't feel like it. And so I use the fact that I'm an introvert to call myself off the appointment. I probably shouldn't do that, and I'm just using it as an excuse because I don't feel like doing it. Maybe I should be a better person and go do the thing I should do, whether I feel like it or not. So yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I think there's a little bit of a mixed bag in the whole descriptor labels thing.
Yeah, I think there's a danger in it, and I think maybe this is kind of the beginning of that. All right, next paragraph, a bit of a longer one here.
When at the end of the poem God enters somewhat abruptly, is struck the sudden and splendid note which makes the thing as great as it is. All the human beings through the story, and Job especially, have been asking questions of God. A more trivial poet would have made God enter in some sense or other in order to answer the questions. By a touch truly to be called inspired, when God enters, it is to ask a number of questions on his own account. In this drama of skepticism, God himself takes up the role of skeptic. He does what all the great voices defending religion have always done. He does, for instance, what Socrates did. He turns rationalism against itself. He seems to say that if it comes to asking questions, he can ask some question which will fling down and flatten out all conceivable human questioners. The poet, by an exquisite intuition, has made God ironically accept a kind of controversial equality with his accusers. He is willing to regard it as if it were a fair intellectual duel. Gird up now thy loins like man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Verse 38:3. The everlasting adopts an enormous and sardonic humility. He is quite willing to be prosecuted. He only asks for the right which every prosecuted person possesses. He asks to be allowed to cross-examine the witness for the prosecution. And he carries yet further the corrections of the legal parallel. For the first question, essentially speaking, which he asks of Job, is the question that any criminal accused by Job would be most entitled to ask. He asks Job who he is. And Job, being a man of candid intellect, takes a little time to consider and comes to the conclusion that he does not know.
It's a great description.
Chapter 38 of Job is my favorite chapter of Job, and it's one of my favorite openings of all of the any chapter in Scripture of any book.
Is this where God pops in?
Yep, and this is what Chesterton is explaining, and I think it might even be worth reading, like if you don't mind, I'll take 30 seconds.
Yeah, please do,
and I'll read it. Because God is, as Job says, God does come upon the scene. He comes to answer the questions, but he comes with questions of his own.
Okay.
So he says, this is the Lord from the beginning of chapter 38 of the book of Job. Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and he said, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." So he comes in as an accuser and says, and he's going to answer, he's going to talk about himself, but he's also going to ask Job questions. And here's the most famous. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand, who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped in thick darkness? When I set limits for it and set its bars and doors in place? When I said, this far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place?" And he goes on. So it's just this powerful, God's coming in and basically saying, where were you when in other words, you want to know what my basis is for doing the things I do? First, answer this question: who are you? and where were you? In other words, I'm the Lord. And implicit and sardonic, as the word that Chesterton uses in that, is you need to know your place when you're questioning God. And then Job does, in fact, take some time to consider, and then he answers. But anyway, it's a powerful opening. It's one of the most famous in Scripture, where the Lord's speaking to man and reverses the whole questioning of God thing.
Can you explain the gird up your loins like a man? I always imagine like a guy, he's like, because I'm about to kick you right in the nuts or something. Like, why does he say that? What's that mean?
So girding your loins is an actual physical act, like when they wore cloth that was strapped around them, and everything was hung like basically they wore more like kilts. It was the effect on the male anatomy was more like a kilt than underwear. But girding your loins meant that you took the cloth that was hanging down, covering your privates, and you would wrap it in a specific way to bind it up so that you could run, fight, and in other words, get ready for battle, because the long robe effect wasn't very good for fighting. So you had to wrap yourself up and create like a sumo wrestler style, but larger sumo wrestler style wrap, and get yourself ready to fight. In other words, it's like put your dukes up is the modern. I mean, it's a phrase that means that, but the physical act of girding one's loins was the wrapping of the robe in a way that allowed you to run, fight, and do other activities like that.
Okay, and so then he's saying, because what, prepare for this?
Yep.
And here I come.
Yeah, you came with me at accusations, so prepare for a fight. Here it is.
All right.
and he's not gentle. This is not community Jesus that is speaking to Job.
So God steps in and he goes, "Prepare your balls. God's
Exactly.
about to talk."
Put on your jockstrap. Protect it.
This is the first great fact to notice about the speech of God, which is the culmination of the inquiry. It represents all human skeptics rooted by a higher skepticism. It is this method, used sometimes by supreme and sometimes by mediocre minds, that has ever since been the logical weapon of the true mystic. Socrates, as I have said, used it when he showed that if you only allowed him enough sophistry, he could destroy all sophists. Jesus Christ used it when he reminded the Sadducees, who could not imagine the nature of marriage in heaven, that if it came to that, they had not really imagined the nature of marriage at all. In the breakup of Christian theology in the 18th century, Joseph Butler used it when he pointed out that rationalistic arguments could be used as much against vague religions as against doctrinal religion, as much against rationalist ethics as against Christian ethics. It's the root and reason of the fact that men who have religious faith have also philosophic doubt. These are the small streams of the delta. The book of Job is the first great cataract that creates the river. In dealing with the arrogant asserter of doubt, it is not the right method to tell him to stop doubting. It is rather the right method to tell him to go on doubting, to doubt a little more, to doubt every day newer and wilder things in the universe, until at last, by some strange enlightenment, he may begin to doubt himself.
There's three examples he gives in here I'd love to go through.
Okay.
He starts with the sophist, Socrates, sophists and sophistry, just to be clear on what sophists are and what sophistry is.
Right. So I said earlier that the word Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom.
Yes,
and
wisdom.
So sophists were the people that looked like they were seeking wisdom, but they weren't. They turned the seeking of wisdom, which Socrates was all for in philosophy. They turned it into a paid gig where they would go around and use they were usually fairly bright guys, and they would use they're like the political commentators of today, like some of the political influencers, where they use their mind to call up questions. I'm just asking questions, man, and they'll call up questions to throw doubt onto true things and to basically spin you mentally around so you don't know which way is up and which way is down, and you're doubting everything, and maybe there was no moon landing, and maybe everything, maybe aliens really seeded the earth, and who knows? You're like, we're just asking questions, man. So
they're like Alex Jones.
No, I got nothing against Alex Jones. I mean, I actually I got a few things against Alex Jones, but they were they were the original, like, let's turn a good work, a good endeavor, which is the seeking of truth and wisdom, let's turn that into a paid gig where I get paid to entertain people by making everyone look stupid. And and Chesterton's point is, and Socrates was very good at, he had sophists in a number of his dialogues come in, these guys that were supposed to be very clever and had the wisdom to show everyone else what their mistakes were. And he would break them. He would, like, in verbally, like, he would show that by using wisdom, he could show that they were idiots. Or they were fools anyway. They weren't idiots. These weren't stupid people, but they were fools and their positions were false. So he could use wisdom to show that people that tried to make everything vague and unknowable were wrong. Just like this guy, Butler, an 18th century bishop who attacked deism. So this deism idea was that God was not a particular God. He didn't love us. There was no Christ. He was just a clockwork God that had made the universe, because the universe is clearly something with order and laws, and that only comes about by a mind, an intellect. And so he did, but he wasn't a personal God, and he was just this vague, and you didn't have to worship him. It was just sort of this, pay lip service to the God of the universe, the creator of all. Thomas Jefferson was a deist, and so that was the God that he refers to in the Declaration of Independence. But Butler went after the deists and said, and because the deists tried to say, well, we're rationalists. Like, we can see by reason that there must be creator of the universe, but we can see that you can't prove that Jesus Christ existed in all of his things that he said. So when we talk about God, we're just going to stick to what we can know by reason. And Butler went in and laid them low, and Cardinal John Henry Newman did the same thing in the 19th century. But he laid them low with all their vagueness by pointing out that if you're really serious about seeking the truth, then that same test of rationality can be used to destroy your own deism, and so your vague theological beliefs are just as untenable, according to when put under the harsh light of scrutiny, as what you claim other things are. So that's his point on those two. Sorry, I went on for a while about that, but
no, that's why you covered two of them. Though I would, just to be clear, like, just the term sophistry,
right?
Is that a negative term about sort of using?
It's a pejorative. Yes, it's a negative term. It means someone who looks like they're giving you an argument for something true, but they're really lying, or they're either propagandizing. They're trying to bring about a point that isn't true, but they want you to believe it for a purpose, or they're just trying to muddle the truth. So it's a negative term.
Okay. And then the last part is when Jesus Christ used it when he reminded the Sadducees of the nature of marriage in heaven. A reminder of that scripture.
Right. So he's talking about the scripture where the Sadducees come to him about a question where, if a man, in Jewish law, if a man was married and then he passes away, his brother would become the husband. I did it again. I keep feminizing men.
So open-minded, you.
This is not my usual mode. My family can assure you. So there is where his brother could take over, and it was really for the care of the widow. So the widow, would be given to his brother. So the Sadducees bring him one of these like, this never happened and probably never will, but we're just gonna we're gonna say, what if this happens? Mm-hmm. And the what if was, what if a man dies and then his wife becomes the wife of his brother, and then he dies, and then it happens like 7 times, I think. I don't have the passage in front of me, but it's and so when they all go to heaven, because the Sadducees were thinking that there was no heaven. That was their point. Yeah. When they go to heaven, whose wife does she belong? Whose husband gets the wife when they all die? Yes. Sorry. Who's the marriage to? Because they're all valid marriages, and Jesus blows them up by just saying, to put it in more modern terms, Spoiler alert: there's no marriage in heaven. So this question isn't. It applies in heaven. We're all like angels, and so there's no creation of new children. There's no sex. There's no marriage. So your premise is wrong. You think you can trap me by using the law and logical premises, but you've forgotten that all first premises can themselves be challenged, and your premise about marriage is wrong and heaven is wrong. So that was the using of reason, Christ using reason to destroy what they thought was an airtight paradox.
All right, we'll continue on.
This, I say, is the first fact touching the speech, the fine inspiration by which God comes in at the end, not to answer riddles, but to propound them. The other great fact, which, taken together with this one, makes the whole work religious instead of merely philosophical, is that other great surprise, which makes Job suddenly satisfied with the mere presentation of something impenetrable. Verbally speaking, the enigmas of Jehovah seem darker and more desolate than the enigmas of Job. Yet Job was comfortless before the speech of Jehovah, and is comforted after it. He has been told nothing, but he feels the terrible and tingling atmosphere of something which is too good to be told. The refusal of God to explain his design is itself a burning hint of his design. The riddles of God are more satisfying than the solutions of man.
As a very famous Chesterton quote, a favorite and a great way to end this part 2.
What do you take from the riddles of God are more satisfying than the solutions of man?
Take that to mean that there are things that God knows, God understands, that could never be explained to us. So to us, they are riddles, and we can take comfort in that it's kind of in a way that a kid does with their dad, with their parents,
Exactly.
I think, or an animal, with a dog to me, my dog to me. I think he takes comfort in all the things that I understand that he doesn't.
Yep, and I agree with you 100%. We're about to get a cat after much wheedling. My youngest daughter.
Cats aren't like that. Cats
No,
have
they're
no
not.
respect.
They're not.
Yeah.
But to go to keep with your dog. Your dog is in a way wiser than a lot of modern commentators and scientists, because the dog knows what the child knows, as you mentioned, which is what Job knows, which is, and keeps in mind, which is, they know that they themselves are not the measure of the universe, and that if there are things which they will not ever understand, at that moment anyway, they think that a child can later come to understand some of those things, but always a child is in relation to his parent as we, as parents or non-parents or adults, should be in relation to God, which is, we know in our hearts that there are things that were beyond our comprehension. Nothing wrong with seeking that which is within our comprehension and wondering. But we know deep down that there are things that we cannot ever know. And so there's a satisfaction in knowing that the creator, our creator, who knows those things, and we do not and cannot, has it under control. He's got it, and we can rest in that. There's a kind of comfort in that, as opposed to the restless, never knowing everything and always being upset because you don't know everything, or a restlessness anyway, that you don't know everything. And so
it goes right back to the Garden of Eden, right? I mean, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
That's exactly right.
We're meant to find all of our truth and we're just trusting God is our whole purpose.
Yep. Yeah, the trust was a better life than the taking of that fruit to ourselves, which brought with it all kinds of trouble. And so bad choice by Eve and Adam. But there was, if they had stuck with what Job was stuck with, he questions. You can imagine Eve and Adam questioning God in the garden, saying, "So tell me again, why is it that I can't eat from this knowledge of the tree of good and evil?" And then God coming back with something probably less harsh, because they weren't as deserving. This is early Old Testament God versus late Old Testament God. But he comes back with them and saying, "So remind me again, where were you at the foundation of the world? Who is it that designed this garden? who is it that creates all the goodness in your life? Don't worry about it. It's in other words, there are things beyond your comprehension. Nevertheless, he gave him the choice. You can still do it if you want. You just won't. It won't end up well. And like a 13-year-old kid, they're like, yeah, but I got to try it. So
Yeah. Yes.
I am an apostle of common sense, 300 pounds. I lie in bed. I have 2 brooms with which I'm painting.
I especially like it knowing that it's based on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is one of my favorite. I love that movie. In my mind, from the Man of Constant Sorrow from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou. In my mind, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is the best Coen Brothers movie. I love that. I love it. Maybe
Nice.
that's
Well,
a controversial take, but
if you join us on Patreon, you get early episodes, you get exclusive content, you get to discuss with other members of the community, and rich Chestertonian discussions. So please join us over
I am
there.
an apostle of common sense, 300 pounds, can
Chester to
hardly
take us out
walk.
here.
My fingertips
Should-
are
we
white
should finish
and
this verse
dusty,
first.
climbing on a piece of chalk. He's climbing on a piece of chalk.
Chesterton's Gateway is produced by Ethan Nicolle and Michael Grumbine. It is
got it
based
right.
on the book of the same name, which can be found on that capitalist monstrosity Amazon.com. Send questions and comments to chestertonsgateway@gmail.com. And join us on Patreon, where only the true Chestertonians can be found. Goodbye.
What didn't y'all listen to Chesterton for?
All right, join us next time for part 3, the finale. Go down. Have a partner.
it's a
Your
violin.
wife in that? Yeah.
Absolutely.